Hello, and welcome back to Haunted Slumber. I'm glad you're here. Before we begin, take a moment to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. Tonight, settle in for 2 hours of slow, atmospheric horror stories, created to help you relax, quiet your mind, and gently drift towards sleep. There will be only 2 or 3 ads during the first 10 minutes. After that, the rest of the journey is completely uninterrupted. If you enjoy eerie, sleep-friendly stories wrapped in calm narration, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new night of haunting tales. Now, get comfortable, let your body grow completely still, and allow the sounds of the outside world to slowly disappear into silence. Tonight, the night is quiet, the shadows are patient, and an old story is waiting to be heard. So close your eyes, take a slow breath, listen carefully, and let yourself drift into haunted slumber. Let's begin. Story 1. It has been 37 days since my brother disappeared. The walls of this apartment feel closer every morning. The air is stale, and whenever I wake, it feels as if I have spent the night breathing dust. My feet are always sore, though I hardly leave the apartment anymore. My eyes looked redder this morning than they did yesterday, even though I have been skipping work more often. Sleep does not help. My dreams press down on me until morning. They follow me into the day, leaving small images behind like dirt trapped beneath my fingernails. Sometimes I wake with the feeling that someone has been standing beside my bed. Other times I open my eyes with a name already forming in my mouth. Barry. That was my brother's name. I know how strange it sounds to say I remember his name as if I might forget it. A person should not need to remind himself of his own brother's name. But lately, every memory feels temporary. If I do not hold on to it tightly, it starts to fade around the edges. Since Barry vanished, I've searched every strange corner of the internet that I remember him visiting. I have spent late nights and early mornings moving through old message boards, forgotten blogs, spiritual communities, and websites that look as though no one has updated them since the early days of the internet. Most of the pages are about Buddhism, meditation, enlightenment, and escaping the suffering of ordinary life. Others are stranger. They discuss shared dreams, hidden truths, beings that live behind human faces, and ways to free the mind from what they call the false world. I keep following links, expecting one of them to lead me to Barry. It would probably be easier to find a white rabbit waiting for me at the end of this search. Still, I continue. One phrase appears again and again. To relieve the world of suffering. I remember that phrase being important to Barry. He was fascinated by the idea that pain was not something people had to accept. He believed suffering was a kind of mistake, something built into the world by accident or by design. He was also terrified that the people he loved would never escape it. Barry spent years chasing peace in different ways. He went on long hiking trips alone. Sometimes he disappeared into the mountains for several days with only a backpack and a cheap tent. Other times, he joined communes or meditation groups. He would live with strangers for a few weeks or months, working in gardens, sleeping on floors, and waking before sunrise to sit in silence. Then he would return home as if nothing unusual had happened. He could be gone for weeks without contacting anyone, so I did not panic immediately when he disappeared. It took me 7 days to realize something was wrong. He had not called, sent a message, or posted anything online. None of his friends seemed to know where he was. Normally, he would at least leave a short message. Going north for a while. Staying with friends. Need some time alone. This time, there was nothing. About 3 weeks ago, I had dinner with my parents and asked whether Barry had contacted them. I was still living with them at the time. At least, that is how I remember it. I knew exactly where Barry's old bedroom was. I remembered sitting on the carpet in that room while we watched cartoons on a small television. I remembered him complaining whenever I touched his things. I remembered where he sat at the dinner table when he came to visit. He always chose the chair nearest the kitchen because he liked getting up for more food without asking anyone to move. I expected my parents to say they had not heard from him. They were used to Barry being distant. They often complained that he forgot birthdays, ignored phone calls, and disappeared whenever he became interested in a new spiritual idea. Instead, my father placed his fork down and stared at me. My mother went completely still. "What did you say?" she asked. I asked if Barry called. She looked at my father. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then my mother said that Barry had been the name of their first child. I laughed because I thought she was making a strange joke. She was not smiling. She told me Barry had died on November 6, 2001. He had lived for 30 minutes after being born and died in her arms. My father repeated the date. November 6, 2001. They spoke as if they had told me the story before. My mother asked whether I had seen someone who looked like the brother I imagined. She said she and Dad had sometimes wondered what Barry might have looked like if he had lived. She said it would not be unusual for my mind to create an image of him, especially if I was lonely or going through a stressful period. I told her she was wrong. Barry had not died as a baby. I had grown up with him. He was my older brother and their son. They should have known him as well as they knew me. They looked at me as if I had announced that I had eaten lunch with Bigfoot. Then my mother asked whether I had been feeling all right. She wanted to know if I was sleeping, eating properly, and taking care of myself. My father began one of his concerned lectures. He said there was no shame in asking for help, and that people sometimes struggled after major changes in their lives. I did not understand what he meant. I told them my life was fine. I had finished high school only 3 months earlier, and I was planning to move out soon. I had a job and enough money saved for a place of my own. They did not answer. They began clearing the table. My mother carried the dishes to the kitchen. My father covered the leftover food and placed it in the refrigerator. When I tried to help, they both moved away from me. My mother coughed and avoided looking directly into my eyes. For a while, I wondered whether they were sick. Perhaps a fever or some kind of flu had confused them. I sat with them in the living room for nearly an hour. We watched television. The couch felt familiar beneath me. The house looked exactly as it always had. I knew the location of every door, every light switch, and every scratch in the wooden floor. For that hour, I managed to believe nothing was wrong. I believed the world was stable. I believed time could not suddenly visit me with something terrifying. Then, I checked my email. There were several messages from a landlord I had never met. The first message reminded me that rent was due. The second said it was late. The third was rude and threatening. He warned me that if I continued ignoring him, he would begin the eviction process. The final message was almost apologetic. He said he understood that people had financial problems, but I needed to contact him. He used my first name. The messages had been sent to my email address. They referred to an apartment where I had never signed a lease. I called the number in the messages. A man answered. He knew me, or at least he believed he did. He asked why I had not returned his calls. He reminded me that I had always paid rent on time before. His voice moved between irritation and concern in the ordinary way people speak to someone they already know. There was a real person on the other side of the phone. He was not pretending. But the person he knew was not me. He used my name and my email address, yet every detail he mentioned belonged to someone else. I had enough money in my account, so I paid him. Then I went to the address. I recognized it. It was Barry's apartment. I remembered the day he moved there. We had taken a picture together in the living room while boxes covered the floor. Barry had burned incense because he claimed the previous tenant had left behind unhealthy energy. The smoke had been so thick that I opened every window and told him the fire alarm would probably call the building manager. I expected the apartment to smell like incense and old books. I expected Barry to be sitting on the couch watching some foreign film that had once been banned in the Soviet Union. Instead, my key opened the front door. I did not remember owning the key. The apartment was silent. I stepped inside and felt something take control of my body. It was as if an invisible creature had wrapped itself around my spinal cord and begun sending instructions into my brain. The creature told me where to place my shoes. It reminded me that the light switch near the door did not work unless it was pressed twice. It guided me toward the kitchen and told me where the glasses were stored. I opened a cupboard and found them exactly where the feeling said they would be. The apartment did not contain Barry's things. It contained mine. My clothes hung in the bedroom closet. My shoes stood beside the wall. My toothbrush was in the bathroom. There were photographs of my parents, but none of Barry. The laundry basket was in a corner I somehow recognized. My bedside table held a book with a receipt inside. The receipt showed that I had bought it 6 months earlier. I had no memory of buying it. Have you ever been on a roller coaster and felt your heart leap as the car reaches the top of a steep drop? My heart did the opposite that night. It seemed to slow down. It beat carefully, as if it were trying to convince me that the sights, smells, and feelings of the apartment were normal. My body believed I lived there. My mind did not. I searched my phone for photographs of Barry. There were none. I checked old messages, voice recordings, and every email account I could remember using. I called numbers that might have belonged to him. Some were disconnected. Others belonged to strangers. I searched social media for his name, but there were thousands of people called Barry, and none of them were my brother. The picture from the day he moved into the apartment was gone. Every piece of proof had disappeared. That night, I had the first dream. I was walking along a nature trail leading into a public park. I knew Barry would be there. It felt as though we had arranged to meet near his car, although I could not remember making the plan. As I followed the trail around a curve, the trees disappeared. They did not fall or fade. I simply lost the ability to notice them. One moment, the path was surrounded by forest. The next, the idea of trees no longer seemed important enough for my mind to hold. I reached the parking lot. A crowd of people from high school rushed around me. Some bumped into my shoulders without apologizing. They were all moving towards something I could not see. At the back of the crowd, I saw Barry. His car was not there, but I knew it was him. I tried to reach him. The air became hot. I felt a target appear on my back. Behind me, a man loaded ammunition into a gun. I heard the metal click as he pushed a magazine into place. I tried to turn, but my body would not move. Barry continued walking toward me. He was not moving quickly, yet he seemed to get closer with every second. The man behind me pulled back part of the gun. The sound was painfully loud. For one brief moment, Barry stepped out of the crowd. At the same time, the armed man changed. His body lost its shape and became something made from smoke and darkness. Somehow, I barely noticed. The stranger in front of me was more disturbing. Barry did not appear to be made of flesh, dust, smoke, or anything that had weight or smell. He looked human, but the world did not seem to recognize him as matter. The man behind me fired. I woke before I hit the ground. Since that night, I have not slept properly. I return to the apartment in the evening and sometimes hear Barry's strange speaking rhythm in my mind. He always paused in the wrong places, especially when explaining his theories about the universe. When I close my eyes, I see small memories of eating lunch with him. The images are weak and distant, like scenes from someone else's childhood. They became so faint that I started wondering whether Barry had been an imaginary friend. Perhaps I created him because I was lonely. Perhaps I invented an older brother to protect me from nightmares and the cold silence of living alone. But imaginary friends do not rent apartments. They do not leave smells behind. They do not teach you how to climb onto a roof without your parents discovering you. I began drawing him. I tried to recreate the missing photograph from the day he moved into the apartment. In the picture, I remembered standing beside him near the window. Barry had one arm around my shoulder and held a smoking stick of incense in the other hand. My first drawing was terrible. The face looked wrong. I tried again. Soon, I covered small sticky notes with sketches of him. I placed them on the refrigerator, walls, door, television, and bathroom mirror. Whenever I entered a room, I wanted his face waiting for me. I was afraid that if I stopped drawing him, I would forget him completely. Sometimes I came home from work and felt a strange calmness enter me. The day's weight would disappear. Something guided me through the apartment, leading me toward the places Barry had stood. I began to believe that the phrase I found online was connected to him. To relieve the world of suffering. It was not merely an idea Barry liked. It was his mission. He had been working towards something important, something larger than meditation or spiritual peace. My parents visited several times. They could not ignore the drawings. At first, they tried to behave as though the situation was harmless. They sat at the kitchen table and asked questions about Barry. What did he do for work? What food did he like? What were his hobbies? They listened with gentle expressions, the way adults listen to a child describing an imaginary world. I told them Barry changed jobs often. I said he liked spicy noodles, old movies, hiking, and books that most people found impossible to understand. For a while, they found the stories charming. Then I told them about his mission. Their expressions changed. "You need help," my father said. My mother took my hand. "You need real friends," she told me. "You need a counselor, someone who can help you stay connected to the real world." That was when I saw the man inside their eyes. He had no shape of his own. He appeared only in the space behind their faces, moving between the reflections in their pupils. The man reminded me of memories I did not have. Memories of sanity being captured, cut apart, and rearranged into something unrecognizable. I stopped listening to my parents. Their mouths continued moving, but the sound disappeared. They left soon afterward. The man remained. Once I knew how to see him, I found him everywhere. He was inside the eyes of people at work. He watched me through the woman who walked her dog past my building each morning. He appeared in parents taking their children to the park. He wants humanity to believe he is one of them. He hides behind familiar expressions and ordinary voices. But my friends online know the truth. They have seen him too. I asked people on Barry's websites about the formless man. Several replied immediately. One said he appears when a person begins moving too close to enlightenment. Another said he is a guard protecting the false world. Someone else called him the keeper of suffering. They warned me that he uses family members, doctors, employers, and friends to push people back into obedience. That is why my parents want me to speak to a counselor. That is why my coworkers look at me with concern. They are either controlled by him or frightened of what I am discovering. I have missed many days of work. When I do go, everyone watches me. My manager asked whether I had been sleeping. A coworker offered to drive me home. I saw the man in both of them. I left before my shift ended. In searching for Barry, I discovered the purpose behind everything he did. The world can overcome suffering. Humanity can become free from insanity. But first, we have to recognize that what we call sanity may only be the cage. I finally understood the truth during another dream. Someone was driving me to work. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window as buildings passed. The familiar anxiety pressed against my chest. I felt the same dread that always came before a shift. Then I realized we were not going to work. I was being taken to paradise. The city around us began to change. Road signs lost their words. Other cars became dark shapes without drivers. Buildings leaned away from the road as if they were trying to avoid looking at us. I turned toward the driver. Barry was sitting behind the wheel. For a moment, I almost did not recognize him. He looked different from the sketches covering my apartment. His hair was longer. His eyes were darker. There were lines near his mouth that I had forgotten to draw. Then I noticed the bump on his nose. I had forgotten it. Barry broke his nose when we were teenagers. He had tried to jump from the roof of our parents' garage into a pile of leaves. He missed the pile and struck his face against the edge of a wooden fence. I remembered sitting beside him in the emergency room. I remembered laughing until he threatened to hit me. I remembered my mother crying when she saw the blood. The bump was real. It was a detail I had not included in any drawing because something had been removing Barry from my mind piece by piece. "You found me," I said. Barry kept his eyes on the road. "Not yet. Where are you?" "Somewhere without suffering. Are you alive?" He did not answer. The road ahead became bright. I could no longer see where it led. "I've been looking everywhere for you," I said. "I know. Mom and Dad say you died as a baby. They have to believe that." "Why?" Barry glanced at me. For the first time, I saw fear in his face. "Because he is inside them now." "The man?" Barry nodded. "He removes people who get too close." "Did he remove you?" "No." His hands tightened around the steering wheel. "I left before he could." The light ahead grew stronger. "What am I supposed to do?" I asked. "Remember me?" "I'm trying." "No," he said. "You are remembering the wrong way." I looked down. The car floor had disappeared. Beneath my feet was an endless darkness filled with moving faces. Some cried silently. Others stared upward with empty eyes. "What does that mean?" "You think I'm your brother. You are my brother." Barry looked at me again. The bump on his nose seemed larger now. His face shifted. For a second, he looked older, then younger. Then his features became similar to mine. "You have to wake up," he said. "I am awake." "No." You haven't been awake for 37 days. The formless man appeared in the rearview mirror. He sat in the back seat behind me. I did not turn around. Barry began driving faster. The man's hands settled on my shoulders. They had no weight, but coldness spread through my body. "Don't listen to him," Barry said. The man whispered into my ear. There was no sound, yet I understood his words. "Barry is not your brother." The car moved into the light. Everything became white. I woke on the floor of my apartment. My mouth was bleeding. Every sticky note had fallen from the walls. The sketches were blank. All except one. It was stuck to the bathroom mirror. The drawing showed Barry sitting in a car. The bump on his nose was clearly visible. Someone had written a message beneath it. I do not remember writing the words. "You are almost free." That was 3 days ago. The landlord has been calling again. My parents have left messages asking me to come home. My manager says I will lose my job if I do not return tomorrow. They all speak with the same careful concern. They all tell me I need help. I can see the formless man inside every one of them. But they cannot fool me now. Barry is real. The bump on his nose proves it. A mind cannot remember a detail it never knew. Tonight, I am going back to the nature trail from my dream. I found the park after searching old maps. It is only 17 miles from the apartment. The trail curves through the trees and leads to a parking lot. I believe Barry will meet me there. The people online say I should go at 3:17 in the morning, when the false world becomes weak. They say I should not take my phone. They say I should ignore anyone who calls my name from behind me. They say that when the trees disappear, I must keep walking. I have filled my pockets with sketches of Barry. I drew the bump on his nose in every one. The walls no longer feel cramped. The air no longer tastes like dust. For the first time in 37 days, I know exactly where I need to go. My brother is waiting. And this time, I am going to remember what he really is. Story 2. The man was late. Jean-Luc Martel checked his pocket watch for the third time in 10 minutes and watched the narrow hand move past 11:15. Where were they? The traveler should have arrived hours ago, when the evening was still young and the tavern was crowded with fishermen, laborers, and shopkeepers warming themselves after a long winter day. Since then, the voices had slowly disappeared, the tables had emptied, and the cold outside had grown sharper. At least a dozen times during the past hour, Jean-Luc had considered standing up, pulling his wool cap over his ears, and walking home. His bed would be warm. His small stone house stood only 15 minutes away, tucked between two narrow streets near the harbor. There would be blankets, a little food, and perhaps enough wood remaining beside the stove to keep the room comfortable until morning. But each time he thought about leaving, he remembered the money. Hundreds of thousands of francs. The amount was so large that it hardly felt real. According to the stranger's intermediary, Jean-Luc would receive it for only one night's work. He did not have to carry anything dangerous, cross a border, or help with a crime. All he needed to do was guide a wealthy foreign traveler through the old streets of Saint-Tropez and help him locate a private house in the La Panche quarter. It sounded simple. Too simple, perhaps still. A man in Jean-Luc's position could not reject that kind of money merely because an arrangement felt strange. He had grown up in Saint-Tropez. His father had spent most of his life pulling a modest income from the sea, and Jean-Luc had followed him into the same hard-working life. Fishing had never made anyone in his family rich, but it had kept food on the table and a roof above their heads. Until recently, that had seemed enough. Now the town was changing. Jean-Luc had first felt it during the summer of 1956, 2 years earlier, when Brigitte Bardot and a film crew arrived to make And God Created Woman. For several weeks, the peaceful La Ponche Quarter had filled with cameras, actors, assistants, journalists, and wealthy visitors. Streets that had normally belonged to fishermen and children became temporary film sets. Local women watched Bardot from windows and whispered about her clothes. Young men crowded near the filming locations, hoping for even a brief look at her. Most people had treated it like a passing excitement. Jean-Luc had not. He had watched the faces of the outsiders. They did not look at Saint-Tropez as a home. They looked at it as something to purchase. Since the film's release, more Parisians had begun arriving. Then came Americans with expensive cameras, carefully styled clothes, and stories about Hollywood. Even during the dead of winter, foreign journalists sometimes appeared along the harbor, asking questions about the movie and the famous actress who had transformed the village into an international curiosity. A simple wooden canteen on Pampelon Beach, once used to feed fishermen and the film crew, was already being changed into a fashionable restaurant for wealthy visitors. Local property prices had begun rising. There were rumors that large luxury yachts would fill the harbor when spring arrived. The fishermen laughed at those rumors, but their laughter often sounded nervous. Jean-Luc understood what was happening. The town he had known since childhood was being prepared for someone else. The stone houses, the docks, the old taverns, the quiet beaches, and even the narrow alleys were becoming products. Wealthy outsiders would buy the best homes, open expensive businesses, and push ordinary local families farther away from the water. The life Jean-Luc understood was slowly ending. Hundreds of thousands of francs could protect him from what was coming. He could save the money. Perhaps he could buy a small property before prices became impossible. Maybe he could repair his father's old fishing boat or open a business of his own. He might even be able to build a future with Gabrielle. Thinking about her made him smile faintly. Gabrielle came from another fishing family. Jean-Luc had known her since they were children, but he had never found the courage or the money to court her properly. He had imagined taking her to a good restaurant, buying a bottle of wine that did not taste like vinegar, and dancing with her in one of the new jazz clubs opening along the coast. With the payment he had been promised, all of that might become possible. So he remained in the tavern. Jean-Luc raised his glass and took another slow drink of cheap red wine. Its rough warmth spread through his chest and briefly pushed back the cold. Le Cabanon de Lys was hidden inside a narrow alley not far from the Place de Lys. It was a small maritime tavern with dark wooden walls, heavy tables, and an iron stove that had probably been installed before Jean-Luc was born. The room smelled of strong Gaulois cigarette smoke, burning wood, wet coats, and the remains of a thick provincial beef stew that had been served earlier that evening. Only an hour ago, the tavern had been loud. Fishermen had argued over cards. 2 dock workers had sung part of an old song before forgetting the words. Someone near the fire had complained about the growing number of tourists. Françoise, the old proprietor, had shouted several times for people to lower their voices. Now, almost everyone had gone home. Empty plates and glasses remained scattered along the tables. In the far corner, one local drunk still sat with his head resting beside an empty glass of pastis. Every few seconds, he released a soft snore. Behind the bar, Françoise cleaned the same spot again and again with an old cloth. The lines on his face deepened each time he glanced at Jean-Luc. Outside, a bitter winter wind moved through the bare trees and narrow streets. The temperature was only a few degrees above freezing, and the mistral blowing down from the north made it feel even colder. The ancient buildings protected the alley from the worst of it, but Jean-Luc could still hear the wind whistling through gaps in the shutters. Francois put down his cloth. "Your foreign gentleman is not coming," he said. "He will come. You said that an hour ago. The driver was bringing him from Cannes. The roads may be difficult. The roads are always difficult in winter." Jean-Luc smiled politely. "Then give him a little more time." Francois looked toward the clock. "I have already given him more time than I give my own wife." The sleeping drunk snored louder. Francois stared at him and sighed. "5 more minutes," he muttered. Jean-Luc nodded, though he doubted the old man meant it. Then the heavy wooden door groaned open. A wave of freezing air rolled across the floor. Jean-Luc sat straighter. Francois looked up with an angry expression, ready to tell the newcomer that the tavern was closing. Michel entered first. The older driver stepped quickly into the warmth and pulled the door partly closed behind him. His eyes moved across the nearly empty room until he spotted Jean-Luc at the corner table. Michel gave him a tense, sudden wave. Then he turned and stared back into the alley. Someone else stood outside. For a moment, only a tall shadow was visible beyond the doorway. Then the stranger entered. He moved with a slow, silent grace that immediately caught Jean-Luc's attention. He was exceptionally tall, at least 1.80 meters, perhaps slightly more. A long, dark overcoat covered most of his body, and a clean fedora rested above a narrow, pale face. The moment the stranger had cleared the entrance, Michel slammed the door. The action was so quick and nervous that Francois stopped cleaning the bar. "We are closing in 5 minutes," the old proprietor announced. His voice was sharp. Jean-Luc raised one hand. "Do not worry, old friend. We will be gone before you turn out the lights." Francois studied the newcomers for several seconds. Then he gave a slow nod and returned to his work, though he continued watching them from the corner of his eye. Michel approached the table. His heavy boots struck the floorboards harder than usual. Jean-Luc stood and offered his hand. "Good evening, Michel. Good evening." Michel's grip felt cold and far tighter than necessary. He quickly released Jean-Luc's hand and wiped his forehead. Despite the freezing weather, there was sweat near his hairline. "How was the drive from Cannes?" Jean-Luc asked. "It was long." Michel's answer came too quickly. Jean-Luc pulled out a chair, but Michel shook his head and remained standing. Only then did Jean-Luc fully notice how nervous the driver appeared. Michel had always been a calm man. He had transported wealthy tourists, politicians, film workers, and drunken businessmen along dangerous coastal roads without complaint. He knew how to flatter arrogant customers and ignore insults when a good tip was possible. Tonight, however, his eyes kept moving toward the stranger behind him. "This is Monsieur Arthur Vance," Michel said. The name immediately made Jean-Luc think of England or America. He prepared to use the broken English he had learned while speaking with Allied soldiers during the war. Before he could say anything, the stranger smiled. "Good evening, Monsieur Martel." Jean-Luc blinked. The man had spoken French. Not the clumsy French of a tourist who had memorized a few useful sentences, but smooth, perfect French. Every word was spoken with careful precision. His accent sounded almost like the formal broadcasts from Paris. "Before you ask," the stranger continued, "I am an American from New York." Jean-Luc quickly hid his surprise. Americans had developed a reputation among working-class people along the Riviera. They were said to be loud, impatient, and eager to display their money. Many expected everyone around them to speak English and made little attempt to learn French. Arthur Vance seemed like the opposite. He was quiet. His clothes were perfectly arranged. His voice was polite and controlled. Jean-Luc offered him a nod. "An American," he said. "What exactly brings an American to?" "Forgive me, gentlemen," Michel interrupted. The driver's voice was sharp enough to make Jean-Luc stop. Michel did not look at Arthur. His eyes remained fixed on the floor. "I am deeply tired," he continued. "The mistral is becoming stronger, and most hotels are closed. I must drive back to Cannes tonight." He swallowed. "Monsieur Vance, if I could be paid, I would like to leave." Jean-Luc stared at him. The request itself was not unusual, but Michel's behavior was. This was a man who normally remained beside wealthy travelers until the final bag had been carried inside and the last coin had reached his pocket. Yet now he seemed desperate to escape. Arthur showed no sign of offense. He calmly reached into the pocket of his spotless overcoat and removed a thick stack of folded bills. He extended the money. Michel hesitated. It was brief, but Jean-Luc saw it. The driver seemed afraid to reach toward Arthur's hand. Then he quickly grabbed the money and pushed it into his coat. Michel turned toward Jean-Luc. For a moment, the two men looked at each other. There was something intense in Michel's expression, something almost like a warning. But before Jean-Luc could ask what was wrong, Michel turned and walked rapidly toward the door. He left without another word. The heavy door closed behind him. Jean-Luc and Arthur remained at the table as the iron stove hissed quietly. After a long silence, Arthur glanced toward the entrance and gave a small shrug. "I confess that I do not understand why he has been so nervous," he said. "He behaved that way from the moment I entered his car in Cannes." Jean-Luc waited. Arthur offered an easy smile. "I suppose some men are not made for dark winter roads. I certainly do not enjoy them myself." The explanation seemed reasonable. The journey from Cannes could be exhausting, especially at night. The coastal road was narrow and full of sharp turns. A tired driver could easily become tense. Jean-Luc decided he would send Michel a telegram in the morning to make sure he had arrived safely. Perhaps the older man had also argued with his wife again. Problems at home often made him behave strangely. Jean-Luc returned his attention to Arthur. "So, Monsieur Vance, you have traveled a long way from New York. What brings you to our quiet village in the middle of winter?" Arthur gave a soft, knowing laugh. "I saw the village inn and God created woman last October," he replied. "I wanted to experience the architecture and atmosphere before everything changes." The answer made Jean-Luc's chest tighten. Once again, the town was being discussed as though it were a film set rather than a home. "I have rented a room in a private house in the La Pancha district," Arthur continued, "very close to the beach where some of the scenes were filmed. I only need you to guide me through the streets and help me find it." Jean-Luc forced a polite smile. "If you are hoping to see Brigitte Bardot herself tomorrow morning, you would have been better off staying in Cannes. She visits Saint-Tropez often and was here recently for the birthday of a jazz musician. But she lives in a large villa hidden in the hills. You will not find her walking around the docks." Arthur laughed. It was a deep, warm sound. "Do not worry, Monsieur Martel. I am not some kind of stalker. I only want to appreciate the village and its history." Jean-Luc became very still. The word felt wrong. Stalker? Jean-Luc knew the English word only as a hunting term. A stalker was someone who quietly followed an animal through woodland. Arthur had used it to describe a man following an actress. The meaning was clear from the sentence, but Jean-Luc had never heard anyone use the word that way. It sounded strangely modern and completely out of place. He studied Arthur more carefully. Under the yellow tavern light, the American's clothing looked almost unnatural. The long wool coat was flawless. There were no wrinkles from a journey across the Atlantic or a long drive from Cannes. No dust, moisture, or loose thread marked the fabric. Even the fedora looked as though it had never been worn before that night. A faint chemical smell came from the coat. Not the usual scent of wool, leather, luggage, or tobacco. Jean-Luc forced himself to relax. Perhaps the word was simply a piece of American slang that did not translate properly, and a wealthy man from New York could certainly afford new clothes. A sudden crash broke the silence. Francoise had struck the bar with a thick wooden club. The drunk in the corner lifted his head slightly, made a confused sound, and collapsed again. "Time to leave," Francois shouted. "I am putting out the fire." Jean-Luc finished the last of his wine. He stood and pulled his wool cap down over his ears. "Good night, old friend." Francois gave him a tired nod. Jean-Luc gestured toward the entrance. "After you, Monsieur Vance. Let us face the Mistral." The cold struck them the moment they stepped outside. Jean-Luc pulled his collar closer around his neck. The alley was nearly black. Only one distant street lamp cast a weak yellow pool across the cobblestones. Arthur stopped beneath the tavern awning and reached into his coat. He produced another thick stack of bills. "This is half of your payment." He pressed the money into Jean-Luc's hand. "You will receive the rest when we reach the doorway of the house." Jean-Luc ran his thumb across the notes. They were real. His heart lifted. He carefully placed the money inside an inner pocket. "There is one small difficulty," Arthur said. Jean-Luc looked up. "I do not know the address." "You do not know the address of the house you rented?" "The owner gave me only a description of the outside, but I was told I would recognize it when I saw it." Jean-Luc found that strange, but the money softened his concern. Rich foreigners often made unusual arrangements. Perhaps a secretary or travel agent had handled the details. "Then we will search," he said. He began walking. As they moved through the alley, Jean-Luc allowed himself to imagine what the payment could do. He could save most of it. He could repair the roof before the next winter. He could replace the worn nets on his father's old boat. He could buy Gabrielle a proper dinner. Fresh sea bream, good wine, music, and dancing. For once, he could show her that he was not a man trapped in the past. He could prove he had a future. A loud commotion behind them broke the pleasant thought. The tavern door flew open. Francois appeared, dragging the half-conscious drunk by the coat. He pushed the man onto the cobblestones, ignored the weak stream of curses that followed, and slammed the door. The iron bolt locked with a heavy sound. A moment later, the tavern windows went dark. Jean-Luc chuckled. He does this every night. Arthur looked at the drunk struggling to sit up. Efficient. Jean-Luc tightened his collar and turned toward the end of the alley. "We will cross the Quai Jean-Jaurès first. Even in winter, the harbor is beautiful. You will see the fishing boats and the black water of the bay. That sounds perfect." Arthur gestured politely, led the way. Their footsteps formed a steady rhythm against the stone. Jean-Luc was exhausted. The wine had added a pleasant heaviness behind his eyes, and he knew he needed to keep speaking, so he would remain alert. "What do you do in New York, Monsieur Vance?" he asked. "You must have a successful profession to afford a winter journey across France." Arthur walked easily beside him. There was a brief pause before he answered. "I work for a telecommunications corporation, mostly infrastructure." He moved one gloved hand through the air, dismissing the subject. "It pays my bills, but it is not my true passion." Jean-Luc was about to ask what that passion was when the narrow streets opened onto the harbor. The Quai Jean-Georges stretched before them. During summer, the waterfront could become crowded with boats, carts, visitors, and fishermen shouting to one another. Tonight, it looked like a ghost town. Small trawlers and paint-worn dinghies rested against the docks. The Mediterranean struck their wooden hulls in a slow rhythm. The Mistral moved freely across the open space, whistling between rooftops and pulling at coats and hats. Arthur walked to the edge of the stone wharf. He raised his head and gave a long, appreciative whistle. "You were right," he said. "It is beautiful." The wonder in his voice sounded genuine. Jean-Luc felt a small spark of local pride. Perhaps he had judged the American too quickly. He was about to tell Arthur that his father had once tied his fishing boat to that very dock when the man's expression changed. The warm interest vanished. His mouth tightened into a cold smile as he looked over the empty harbor. Then, Arthur spoke in English. "Looks a hell of a lot better without all the oversized fucking status yachts clogging up the harbor." Jean-Luc stopped. Arthur had spoken quickly, but Jean-Luc understood him. The Allied soldiers he had met during the war had taught him enough English, including the curses. The words themselves were rude, but their meaning disturbed him more. Oversized status yachts? There were no such boats in Saint-Tropez. A few rich industrialists and old aristocratic families sometimes brought pleasure vessels during July, but those were modest wooden cruisers. The harbor still belonged to fishermen. Arthur had spoken as though the docks were normally filled with huge luxury yachts, as though he had seen it. There was also something bitter in his voice, not simple dislike. Hatred. Jean-Luc remembered Michelle's sweating face and nervous eyes. Something was wrong with Arthur Vance. He turned away from the water. "This way, monsieur." His voice sounded tighter than he intended. He guided Arthur away from the harbor and toward the old La Ponche Quarter. Jean-Luc no longer cared about conversation. He wanted to locate the house, collect the rest of the money, and go home. They entered the maze of stone alleys. The streets narrowed quickly. In some places, the buildings stood so close together that only a thin line of sky remained above them. Jean-Luc increased his pace. He tried to stay a few steps ahead of Arthur. These were the streets of his childhood. He had chased friends through them, hidden behind doorways, carried baskets of fish along them, and walked home drunk through them more times than he could remember. He knew every turn. Yet that night, the alleys seemed different. Each corner looked like the last. Every dark doorway appeared deeper than it should have been. The buildings pressed inward. "You have become very quiet, Monsieur Martel." Arthur's voice came from directly behind him. Jean-Luc felt cold move through his chest. Though he could not see Arthur's face, he had the uncomfortable feeling that the man was smiling. "I'm tired," Jean-Luc replied. "I must concentrate so I do not lead us into a dead end." "Ah, exhaustion." Arthur repeated the phrase with almost the exact rhythm Jean-Luc had used earlier. His footsteps continued behind Jean-Luc in perfect time. "Whenever I feel tired, I find it useful to listen to another person speak. Conversation prevents the mind from drifting into the darkness." Jean-Luc did not want Arthur to continue speaking. Every instinct told him to remain polite. As you wish, monsieur, excellent. Arthur's voice became cheerful again, but the cheer sounded artificial. Let us play a game. Jean-Luc kept walking. It is something I used to play with my companions when I was a boy. We imagined what the world would look like 60, 70, or even 100 years in the future. Jean-Luc said nothing. At first, we imagined grand things, Arthur continued. Flying machines, cities reaching into the clouds, human settlements on distant planets. The usual childish nonsense. His voice settled into the calm rhythm of a storyteller. But the smaller details are more interesting. Imagine telephones without wires, small enough to carry inside your pocket. Imagine televisions as thin as panes of glass, hanging on the walls of ordinary homes because everyone can afford them. Jean-Luc frowned. The ideas sounded absurd. Imagine medicine capable of curing diseases that are now certain death. Machines that can look inside the body without cutting it open. Perhaps people will even find ways to delay death itself. Arthur's voice became softer, and if technology advances far enough, perhaps mankind will learn to move through time. A person could travel backward and visit any moment in history. For a brief moment, Arthur sounded almost sad. Then his tone changed. The softness disappeared. But the people who inherit all of it, he said, I cannot stand them. The words came faster. The future people. Weak, frightened, parasitic little things. They destroy everything beautiful and congratulate themselves for doing it. They gather in crowds like insects, watched by invisible eyes that they call protection. Jean-Luc's breathing became shallow. He walked faster. Arthur remained exactly 2 steps behind him. His breathing never changed. They tear down old buildings, Arthur continued. They replace history with glass, steel, advertising, and expensive apartments. They complain about everything while enjoying comforts kings could never have imagined. Jean-Luc turned into another alley. Arthur followed. And the weapons, the Americans said with growing excitement. Think about the weapons they will create. Jean-Luc felt sweat form beneath his cap despite the cold. Black steel shotguns with heavy mechanical actions. Rifles that can fire an entire magazine with one pull of a trigger. A man could tear a dozen people apart in seconds. Arthur laughed quietly. And the knives. Heavy blades with jagged teeth along the edge. Teeth designed to catch on bone and tear flesh apart. Jean-Luc's stomach tightened. He was walking alone through the dark with a madman. He considered running. But Arthur was taller, younger, and apparently untroubled by the pace. Jean-Luc imagined the money inside his coat. Suddenly it felt less like a payment and more like something placed on a corpse. My favorite prediction, Arthur continued, lowering his voice, is the development of forensic science. The words came from very close behind Jean-Luc's ear. In the future, the authorities will be able to identify a man from his blood. They will find invisible marks left by his fingers on glass. Cameras will watch every street and record every person passing through. Jean-Luc looked up desperately. All the windows around him were dark. It will become wonderfully difficult to escape after committing a crime, Arthur said. A robbery. An assault. He paused. The silence lasted only a second, but it seemed much longer. A murder. A low laugh followed. Jean-Luc's self-control finally began to break. He searched the houses for any sign of help. A lamp behind a curtain. A moving shutter. Someone opening a door. Anything. But it was midnight in winter. The church bell sounded somewhere beyond the rooftops. Every house was closed. Every family was asleep. The windows looked like dead black eyes. Jean-Luc was alone with the American. He walked faster until his boots struck the stones in a frantic rhythm. His breath came in pale clouds. Then a thought stopped him. It entered his mind with sudden, terrible force. Jean-Luc froze in the middle of the alley. Behind him, Arthur's footsteps stopped. The silence was complete. Jean-Luc's mind returned to the tavern. He saw Michel enter. He heard Michel introduce the traveler, Monsieur Arthur Vance. But before Michel had introduced Jean-Luc, the American had smiled and said, "Good evening, Monsieur Martel." Jean-Luc had never told him his name. Michel had not told him either. Arthur had known it before entering the tavern. He had known exactly who was waiting. A cold wave passed through Jean-Luc's body. His knees weakened. "My God," he whispered. A low chuckle came from behind him. This time there was nothing polite in it. "Is something wrong, Jean-Luc?" Arthur asked. "Why have we stopped?" Jean-Luc could no longer pretend. His back remained turned as his body shook beneath his coat. "How did you know my name?" The question came out weakly. "I never told you. Michel never told you. How did you know who I was?" Arthur laughed again. The sound was hollow and wet. When he replied, his perfect French had vanished. He spoke in fast, casual English. "Ain't that a fucking mystery, Jean-Luc?" Arthur paused. "I would tell you, but honestly, spoilers." Jean-Luc did not fully understand the final word in that context. The strange modern rhythm of Arthur's voice frightened him more than the meaning. He could no longer bear having the man behind him. Slowly, Jean-Luc turned. The alley was empty. Arthur Vance had disappeared. There was nowhere he could have gone without making a sound. No door had opened. No footsteps had moved into another street. The tall figure had simply vanished into the stone and darkness. Jean-Luc should have felt relieved. Instead, Arthur's absence made everything worse. Every doorway became a hiding place. Every archway seemed occupied. The familiar alleys of his childhood looked twisted and hostile. His own town had become a trap. Then a whisper came from a dark archway beside him. "Run!" Jean-Luc ran. He did not choose a direction. He simply moved. His boots struck the stones as he rushed through one alley and then another. Behind him, he heard no footsteps. That frightened him more than pursuit would have. He turned left, then right. The streets seemed to rearrange themselves around him. A wall appeared where he expected an open passage. A staircase led toward a doorway he did not recognize. The buildings leaned inward until he felt he was running through a tunnel. "Help!" he shouted. His voice echoed through the quarter. No door opened. He continued running. The money shifted inside his coat. He pulled it out and threw it onto the street. Notes scattered behind him. "Take it!" he screamed. "I do not want it." A soft laugh sounded from somewhere above. Jean-Luc looked up. Arthur stood on a roof. For a moment, the American's tall silhouette was visible against the night sky. Then it disappeared. Jean-Luc ran again. His lungs burned. He reached a familiar fountain and realized he had returned to a place he had already passed. That should have been impossible. He had taken different turns. The alley behind him darkened. A long shape moved within it. Jean-Luc screamed and fled in the opposite direction. People later said the cries began shortly after midnight. The first scream woke an elderly woman in a house near the center of La Ponche. She sat upright in bed and listened as another cry moved through the streets. It sounded like a man. Then it sounded like an animal. The fear in it was so raw that she pulled her blanket over her head and began praying. Other residents woke as the screaming continued. A few fishermen opened their shutters and looked into the alleys below. They saw nothing, only empty stone streets beneath occasional lamps. But the cries moved rapidly through the quarter, turning corners and changing direction. They seemed to come closer, then farther away. One man later said he heard laughter between the screams. Not loud laughter, a calm, amused chuckle. The cries eventually moved toward the water. Jean-Luc burst from the final alley near the Plage de la Ponche. The narrow beach lay empty beneath the dark sky. Cold waves rolled onto the stones. He could hear Arthur somewhere behind him. Not walking, breathing, Jean-Luc stumbled across the beach. He looked left and right for somewhere to hide. There was nothing, only the sea. A voice spoke near his ear. "You almost made it." Jean-Luc turned. Arthur stood several meters away. His coat remained perfect. His fedora sat in exactly the same position. He did not appear tired. His pale face held a pleasant half-smile. "What are you?" Jean-Luc asked. Arthur tilted his head. Would the answer help? Jean-Luc stepped backward. Water reached his boots. "You knew me. I did." "Why?" Arthur's smile widened slightly. "Because you were here." Jean-Luc shook his head. "I do not understand." "You were not supposed to." The American stepped closer. Jean-Luc moved farther into the sea. Freezing water rose above his ankles. Arthur remained near the edge. "People always believe time is a road," he said. Forward, straight, simple, the wind pulled at his coat. It is not. Jean-Luc continued backing away. The water reached his knees. Arthur's eyes looked darker than before. "You wanted to know the future of Saint-Tropez," he said. "You were right to fear it. The fishermen leave. The houses become investments. The harbor fills with white yachts so large they block the old town from the sea." Jean-Luc stared at him. "The people who come after you will drink expensive wine where your friends once ate stew. They will photograph your streets and call them beautiful because they never had to survive here." "Stop. Gabrielle marries someone else." Jean-Luc's face went still. Arthur smiled. "You never tell her how you feel. Stop. You spend the next years watching the town become something you do not recognize." Jean-Luc's eyes filled with tears. "That is not true. It would have been." Arthur took another step. "But you do not have to see it." Jean-Luc turned and tried to move through the water. His boots slipped on the stones. He fell forward. The freezing sea closed over his chest. He struggled to rise. A hand closed around the back of his coat. Jean-Luc screamed. The sound carried across the water. There was violent splashing. Then silence. The winter night returned to normal. The mistral moved through the empty quarter. Waves struck the shore. No one saw Arthur Vance leave the beach. At dawn, a fisherman came down to prepare his boat. The sky was gray and cold. As he approached the water, he noticed a dark shape floating in the shallow tide. He first thought it was a coat or fishing net. Then he saw the hand. Jean-Luc Martel lay face down in the freezing water. The fishermen shouted for help. Several locals rushed to the beach, but there was nothing they could do. Jean-Luc was dead. The gendarmerie arrived soon afterward. They pulled his body from the water and began asking questions. There were no clear injuries except marks around one ankle and dark bruising near the back of his neck. The official cause of death was drowning. Investigators traced Jean-Luc's final evening to Le Cabanon de Lys. Francois looked pale as he told them everything. Jean-Luc had waited for hours. Michel had arrived with a tall American traveler. The stranger called himself Arthur Vance. He wore expensive clothes and spoke perfect French. Michel was located later that day. The driver had reached Caen safely, but he appeared exhausted and frightened. At first, he refused to answer questions. When the officers threatened to detain him, he finally described the journey. Arthur Vance had entered his car outside the Caen railway station. There had been no luggage. Michel asked where his bags were, and Arthur replied that he had already sent them ahead. For most of the drive, the American remained silent. He sat in the rear seat and watched the road. Michel said that every time he glanced into the mirror, Arthur appeared to be staring directly at him. At one point, while passing a dark section of coast, the car radio suddenly filled with static. A voice spoke through it. Michel could not understand most of the words because they were in English, but the voice sounded exactly like Arthur's. Arthur had not moved his mouth. When Michel turned off the radio, the voice continued for several seconds. Later, Arthur began describing accidents that had happened along the coastal road. He spoke about cars that had gone over cliffs and bodies recovered from the water. Some of the accidents had not happened yet. At least one occurred years later exactly where Arthur had described it. Michel told the police that he had become convinced the passenger was dangerous. That was why he had left the tavern so quickly. He had wanted to warn Jean-Luc, but fear stopped him. The gendarmes searched Saint-Tropez, Cannes, and the surrounding region. No one named Arthur Vance had entered France under that identity. No American matching his description had registered at any hotel, boarding house, or private residence. No train or ship record placed him in Cannes. The house he claimed to have rented in La Ponche did not exist. The address had never existed. Arthur Vance appeared to have entered the region without leaving any official trace. Days became weeks. The investigation produced nothing. At the same time, local authorities grew increasingly nervous about publicity. The film starring Brigitte Bardot had placed Saint-Tropez in the international imagination. The summer of 1958 was expected to bring wealthy visitors, journalists, artists, actors, and business owners. An unsolved murder involving a mysterious foreigner could damage the town's new reputation. Officials made a quiet decision. Details were withheld from regional newspapers. Jean-Luc's death was described publicly as a tragic winter drowning after a night of drinking. The stranger was not mentioned. The terrified screams heard through La Ponche were ignored. Jean-Luc was buried in the cemetery overlooking the sea. The money Arthur had given him was never found. For several months, residents locked their doors earlier than usual. Shutters were closed before midnight. Fishermen avoided the narrow alleys when returning from taverns. Some claimed they saw a tall man standing near the harbor during storms. Others heard perfect French spoken from empty streets. But no one else disappeared. Spring arrived. Then summer. The rumors faded beneath the noise of visitors. The yachts came. At first, there were only a few. Then, more. Within years, the harbor looked exactly as Arthur had described it. Large white pleasure boats filled the docks. Wealthy tourists crowded the waterfront. Old homes became expensive properties. Restaurants replaced fishermen's canteens. Saint-Tropez became famous. Jean-Luc became a forgotten local tragedy. But not everyone forgot him. A few friends and relatives quietly searched for Arthur Vance. They contacted officials in Cannes, Paris, London, Rome, and New York. They searched old passenger records and hotel ledgers. No American by that name matched the man from the tavern. Then, years later, one researcher found an old report from occupied Paris. In 1942, a schoolboy had disappeared while walking home. Witnesses said he had last been seen speaking to a tall, well-dressed foreign man who spoke perfect French. The description matched Arthur, but the date made no sense. The stranger in 1942 appeared the same age as the man in Saint-Tropez 16 years later. Another report was discovered in London. In 1931, a young married couple had been found murdered inside a locked house. A neighbor had seen them enter the building with a tall foreign visitor in a flawless dark coat. The visitor spoke perfect English but used unfamiliar expressions. Again, the description matched. More records appeared. A wealthy woman thrown from a bell tower in Rome in 1897. A merchant who vanished from Prague in 1870. A soldier found drowned near Marseille decades earlier. A family murdered inside a farmhouse in the 18th century. Different countries, different languages, different centuries. Each victim had been seen with a charming foreign stranger. He was always tall, always perfectly dressed. He always spoke the local language without error. He often used words or expressions that did not belong to the period. Sometimes he described inventions that had not yet been created. Sometimes he spoke about buildings that did not yet exist. Sometimes he mentioned wars, disasters, or deaths that had not happened. The names changed. Arthur Vance, William Hart, Alessandro Moretti, Henri Valeur. No identity could be confirmed. No birthplace could be found. The final detail was the most disturbing. In every report, from the oldest handwritten record to the file concerning Jean-Luc Martel, the stranger's physical description remained exactly the same. The same height, the same pale face, the same dark wool coat, the same polite half-smile. He never appeared older. He never appeared younger. And according to an account found many years later, a traveler visiting modern Saint-Tropez claimed to have met a quiet American near the harbor one winter night. The stranger complained about the enormous yachts blocking the view. Then he asked the traveler whether he wanted to see the real Saint-Tropez, the town as it had existed before the celebrities, money, and crowds. He said he knew a way to visit. All the traveler had to do was follow him into the old streets. Story 3. The heat was unbearable. The air felt too thick to breathe, as though the whole world had been wrapped in a wet blanket. The burning July sun struck the back of my neck, and sweat covered my skin, sticking my hair to my forehead. The running track shimmered in front of me like a mirage. The white lines separating each lane blurred together whenever I stared at them for too long. I stood upright and stretched my legs, then lifted my arms above my head. My heart was already pounding, even though the race had not started. Mima, my best friend, stood directly in front of me with both hands on her hips. Her long eyelashes made her confident grin look even more dramatic. She held my water bottle out towards me. When I reached for it, she quickly pulled it away. Nope, too slow. She laughed at the annoyed look on my face. I'm just messing with you. She finally handed it over. I took a long drink, then spat a mouthful of water towards her. Mima squealed and jumped away, narrowly avoiding the splash. I was jealous of her summer dress and comfortable sandals. With her strawberry blonde curls and pink clothes, Mima looked like cherry blossoms in full bloom. Meanwhile, my ultraviolet protection shirt felt as though it were melting into my skin. "I can't believe they're making you run in this heat," Mima said. She dragged one finger through the sweat covering my arm. "This is technically child abuse." "I'm fine. You don't look fine." She poked my cheek, widening her eyes. "You're red and puffy." I stuck my tongue out at her and looked towards Coach Croft, waiting for the whistle that would tell us to move into position. Mima pulled her phone from the pocket of her shorts and bumped me with her hip. "Guess who's trending?" I did not need to look at the screen. "What has he done this time?" Her grin gave me the answer before she spoke. "He got caught doing cocaine at an exclusive club in Los Angeles with a group of child celebrities. Isn't he 12? I hissed while jogging on the spot. 12 and a half, she corrected dramatically. "He's celebrating his birthday on television." She pushed the phone in front of my face. I caught a brief look at the photograph. There he was. Prince Hawthorne wore a baseball cap and oversized sunglasses while trying to hide behind several friends who looked just as young as he did. He was doing a terrible job of avoiding the cameras. Mima looked delighted. She had been hoping for his public downfall ever since he won a Teen Choice Award for appearing in a film for approximately 3 seconds. "He'll be fine," I said. "He's the biggest Nepo baby in the country." I took the phone and studied the photograph more closely. Prince Hawthorne was supposed to be America's crown jewel. Instead, he was slowly becoming a scandal with legs. He appeared everywhere except inside a classroom. Our country's leaders were complicated. 50 years earlier, after the collapse of the constitutional amendments and a long period of political violence, the Hawthorne family had somehow established an American monarchy. We now had a royal family. The adults in charge refused to admit that the 12-year-old heir to the throne was already becoming a tabloid disaster. I had expected stories about parties, rude behavior, and damaged hotel rooms. I had not expected cocaine with child actors. "Isn't he supposed to be grounded?" I asked. "In Washington?" A voice suddenly echoed through the stadium speakers. "All runners taking part in the 100-meter relay must make their way to the track." I repeat, all runners must move to their starting positions. Mima spun around with a grin. She gave me a final wave and wrapped her arms around me in a sweaty hug before running towards the stands. I walked to my lane and slowly lowered myself into position. "Breathe," I told my racing heart. I placed my feet against the starting blocks. One heel rested firmly behind me, while the tips of my fingers barely touched the scorching track. My breaths trembled. I became painfully aware of the scout sitting in the stands. He was watching every movement I made, every twitch of my fingers, every unsteady breath, every time my heel bounced against the block. He was waiting to see whether I would fail. Smile, that was what Mom had told me before the event. Smile, be confident, show him how much you want this. Mom had no idea what she was talking about. She was not a runner. She did not understand that success did not come from smiling or positive thinking. It came from pain. It came from sweat, damaged muscles, early mornings, and finishing a race even when your lungs felt as though they were tearing apart. Athletes did not smile until they stood on the podium. Even then, the result was often not good enough. You smiled only when you were the best, when you had won gold, when you had clawed your way above everyone else. To my left was Jesse Cromer, a 16-year-old silver medalist. He looked like someone from a Calvin Klein advertisement, His dirty blonde hair was pushed away from his face, and his lean body remained perfectly still. His mouth tightened with concentration. I tried not to stare at him. I had developed a huge crush on Jesse the first time I saw him run. Then I spoke to him. After that, I became convinced Jesse Cromer was an artificial intelligence program trapped inside a human body. Our conversations usually went like this. "Hey, Jesse. How are you?" "I'm okay. How are you?" That was almost the full extent of our relationship. To my right was Poppy Cartwright, a 15-year-old regional champion. She was already smiling as though she were standing on the winner's podium. I hated how confident she looked. I also hated her long red hair, which had been tied into a perfect braid that fell down her back. At 13, with no medals and no trophies, I felt completely out of place between them. Jesse kept glancing towards me with his usual blank expression. I imagined him wondering why an actual child had been placed beside him. But I was fast. I was the youngest athlete being considered for a scholarship to Brookside, an elite school for future Olympians. Brookside was my chance to become something better. "Take your marks," Coach Croft shouted. The familiar rush of adrenaline moved through me, sending my body into a state between panic and excitement. Then a robotic voice came from somewhere in the stands. The World Health Organization is now considering the immersive virus a potential global threat as confirmed cases continue spreading beyond Iceland. I tried to ignore it. Infections have now been reported in Norway and Denmark. Earlier this morning, a flight was grounded in Edinburgh, Scotland, after 2 passengers tested positive. Breathe, focus, nicknamed Ymir after a figure from Norse mythology, the virus was first identified in Reykjavik 2 weeks ago. Since then, the confirmed death toll has risen to more than 3,000 across Europe. Coach Croft turned towards the stands. "Can somebody switch that off?" I said no phones. The report continued. Unverified accounts describe rabies-like aggression combined with severe hypothermia, raising fears that infected patients may turn it off. Coach Croft shouted. Coach was obsessed with appearing professional in front of her audience. A former Olympic athlete was sitting in the stands, which meant she was even more nervous than usual. The news video grew louder. A recently deleted social media video appears to show a masked nurse inside an Oslo hospital claiming she was attacked by a patient who had already been declared clinically dead. The words made my fingers press harder against the track. The video received more than 15 million views before being removed. Government officials have described the footage as a hoax. Coach Croft stormed towards the stands. "Turn your phones off or leave." Even with her shouting, the volume increased. Jesse's back legs suddenly moved. It was only a small spasm, but Jesse never moved before the starting signal. Poppy's heel began bouncing against her block. Neither of them needed to say anything. Athletes were trained to be selfish. The world could be ending around us, but all we were supposed to care about was the goal in front of us. A medal, a trophy, a place on the United States team. Sometimes even selfishness could not protect you from reality. I remembered the endless news reports, the frightened voices on the car radio, the empty shelves I had seen when buying sports drinks. I was familiar with fear. I knew the fear of losing a race. I knew the anger I felt towards myself when I failed. I knew the anxiety that came before every important event. This fear was different. It was older. Primal, I glanced towards Mima. She gave me 2 thumbs up and a wide, ridiculous smile. My chest tightened. The scout's attention felt like heat against the back of my head. I reminded myself that only my future depended on this race. Nothing important. But did I even have a future? 3,000 deaths. The number repeated itself inside my head. Hadn't the reported death toll been only 250 a few days earlier? I remembered hearing the report while Mom drove me home from practice. The estimated number of confirmed deaths has now reached 250. She had quickly changed the station. Beside me, Jesse released a trembling breath. His shoulders were tight. He was struggling to breathe evenly. I knew that feeling. For him, forcing air into his lungs was the difference between sinking and swimming, winning and losing. A cruel part of me saw his fear as an opportunity. If Jessie failed, I had a better chance. Coach Croft marched towards the stands, her tight blonde braids swinging behind her. On your marks. My thoughts disappeared. I forgot the virus. I forgot the scout. I forgot Mima, Hawthorne, and the frightening report. Only one thought remained. Win. The starting pistol cracked through the air. My body tried to launch forwards, but my back leg did not move. My heel felt frozen to the starting block. None of the other runners moved either. Jesse remained in place with his head tilted backwards, staring at the sky. Coach Croft screamed at us to run. A sudden shiver traveled down my body. White mist escaped my lips. The temperature dropped so quickly that it knocked the air from my lungs. I slowly lifted my head. A shadow moved across the sky. It swallowed the sunlight and every piece of warmth that had been burning my skin only seconds earlier. Small white objects floated through the air. At first, I thought they were ash. Being an athlete meant being selfish, but there was only so much we could ignore without losing our minds. Jesse made a quiet sobbing sound. His shoulders dropped. The calm, emotionless expression he had been taught to wear disappeared. Athletes learn the art of ignorance from childhood. We were taught to control pain, ignore fear, and keep moving no matter what happened. We were puppets attached to invisible strings. Jesse's strings had been cut. His eyes widened. His lips parted. I saw pure terror on his face. For the first time, Jesse was allowing himself to be afraid. Watching him break destroyed whatever control I still had. I sank to my knees and held out one trembling hand. A white flake landed in my palm. It did not melt. It clung to my skin and formed sharp crystalline edges. One corner cut into my hand. I had to pull it free like a splinter. Snow, the frightened sound of my own breathing, joined Jesse's. A freezing wind swept my hair away from my face as the flakes became larger and heavier. They spun around us and settled on the hot running track. Snow was falling. In July. I remembered that moment. Then, I remembered nothing. When I became aware again, I was not alive. But I was not completely dead either. I had no name, no clear memories. My thoughts came in broken pieces, disappearing whenever I tried to hold on to them. I was cold. I did not know why I was cold, or why the cold did not hurt me. Before opening my eyes, I saw a sky filled with stars. They flashed against the darkness behind my eyelids. The sight made me strangely happy. The stars looked far away, yet close enough to touch. I raised both arms and reached for them. Each one became a bleeding explosion of light between my fingers. Stars, I was freezing, but I held them in my fists. Did I like stars? Had this body once believed in them? I blinked. The night sky disappeared. A white bathroom ceiling stared down at me. My arm was still raised as though I were trying to catch something that was no longer there. I was lying inside a bathtub filled with dirty, blood-stained water. Dark red marks covered the white tiles. They reminded me of spilled paint. That was my first complete thought in what felt like a very long time. Was it my blood? Had I turned the water red? The bathroom lights were painfully bright. When I tried to move, I discovered I was lying flat on my back. My head rested against ice-cold porcelain. My body felt stiff and wrong. I looked older than the girl in my broken memories. 17, perhaps 18. My legs were longer than I remembered, stretching through the dirty bubbles. Wet auburn hair stuck to my shoulders and back. I was cold. Not the kind of cold I remembered. The body I occupied understood a gentler version of cold. Drinking iced tea on my grandmother's porch, eating fruit slushies during summer. A memory touched the edge of my mind. I saw a campfire beneath a mountain sky. Stars shone overhead. A man sat near the flames. His face was hidden, more shadow than person, but his voice was warm. "Are you cold, sweetheart?" "No," a young version of me answered. I was small, perhaps preschool age. I rubbed my hands together while pretending my teeth were not chattering. The memory flickered and disappeared before I could see more. Winter had once meant snow days, sledding, and watching flakes cover the ground while hoping school would be canceled. It had meant walking home beneath streetlights while the wind pushed my hair across my face. This cold was different. It was bitter and empty, dead cold. It held me against the bottom of the bathtub as though I had been placed inside a coffin filled with soap and water. I touched my throat. The skin felt wet and artificial, almost like thin plastic. My dress clung to my body. There was a metallic taste across my tongue, teeth, and throat. I pressed 2 fingers against the center of my chest. Nothing. There was no warmth beneath my skin. No pulse in my neck. No breath leaving my mouth. I tried to inhale. My lungs felt empty and collapsed. I did not need air. I could have remained beneath the water forever without drowning. I was dead. The thought struck me so suddenly that it almost felt funny. I'm dead. I'm actually dead. I sank lower into the bathtub and tried to focus on anything except the silence inside my body. I stared at the shampoo bottles arranged along the side. They looked expensive. Creamy passion fruit, orange thrush blast, cinnamon joy. I tilted my head. Maybe death was not completely terrible. I did not feel like a corpse. My body was cold and possibly rotting, but I could still pretend to breathe. I moved my big toe, then my foot. My muscles still worked. I pressed a fist to my chest and tested my voice. "Hello?" The word came out as a weak croak. I forced myself into a sitting position and looked over the edge of the bathtub. The bathroom was much larger than I had realized. The floor was polished marble, and 2 bright yellow towels hung from a metal rail. It looked like a shared bathroom. Fear moved through me. It was not quite panic, but my body recognized the feeling. My chest tightened even though my heart was not beating. Knots formed in a stomach that should not have worked. This body was used to fear. Its arms and legs immediately prepared to escape. My hands gripped the sides of the bath. This body knew how to run. Its bones and muscles were already trained to throw me forwards the moment danger appeared. But true panic was no longer part of me. Panic required a living body. I pulled myself up. Something dragged me backwards. I fell into the water again. I was not alone. Something was connected to my wrist. Something warm. Something breathing. I pulled again and heard the metallic rattle of handcuffs. A boy was curled beside me, half submerged in the bloody water. He appeared close to my age, perhaps slightly younger. His clothes immediately told me he came from money. He wore a torn white shirt, soaked jeans, and an expensive watch around his wrist. Unlike me, his heart was beating. Ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum. The sound was powerful and healthy. I envied every breath he took and every shiver that passed through him. He knew ordinary cold, human cold. I was wrong cold. I should not have been able to sense every movement of blood through his veins. I could hear each beat of his heart as clearly as if my ear were pressed against his chest. I could smell him too. Antiseptic, burned plastic, and beneath both was the thick metallic smell of blood. The boy groaned and shifted. His face remained against the side of the bathtub, partly hidden beneath the water. Deep cuts covered his wrists. Yellow and green bruising spread beneath his fingernails and along his elbow. He suddenly became still. His breathing turned quick and uneven. He was awake, but pretending not to be. "They're watching," he whispered. "Pretend you're asleep." "Who are you?" I asked. My voice remained rough. He did not answer immediately. He turned, pulling our cuffed wrists together and dragging me closer. "I don't know," he hissed. "I woke up here with nothing. My mind is blank." His voice sounded familiar. His face remained hidden beneath wet curls and dirty water. "Why are you so cold?" he asked. Instead of answering, I lowered myself back into the water and looked at the ceiling. A large surveillance camera was hanging only inches above my face. I was certain it had not been there before. "If they think we're asleep, they'd leave us alone for a while," the boy whispered. "But it never lasts." I closed my eyes. After 1 second, curiosity forced me to open them again. The camera was still there. Its lens moved in and out like the eye of a curious child. It studied us. A small red light flashed twice. Then the camera folded silently into the ceiling and disappeared behind a white panel. The boy curled into a ball and buried his face against his knees. Because of the handcuffs, his movement dragged me towards him. Part of me hated him for breathing. His heartbeat was unbearable. Ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum. I knew him. I looked towards his face. "Stop staring at me," he muttered. "I'm not." "Yes, you are." His voice was irritatingly familiar. It carried the endless complaint of someone who had never been told no. "You still haven't answered me," he said. "Why are you freezing?" I knew this boy, but from where? I pushed the question away and focused on my own condition. Denial felt easier. Maybe being a corpse was not as terrible as I assumed. Dead people could apparently move, speak, and wake inside expensive bathrooms. I thought about the shampoo again. The bottles reminded me of the kind Mima's parents kept in their house. Mima. My eyes opened fully. I had not noticed that my head had slipped beneath the water. I shot upright. I tried to leap out of the bathtub, but my dead body did not move naturally. My limbs were stiff, and I fell over the edge, landing heavily on my knees before collapsing onto my stomach. I did not know my name. I did not know why I was dead. I did not know why I was chained to a living boy. But I knew Mima. She was my best friend. My memories showed me cherry blossoms, warm pink beneath a clear blue sky. strawberry blonde curls, and a wide smile. I could not see her eyes. Her face remained partly hidden, like a ghost standing at the edge of my mind. It was enough to force my body to move. Wait. The boy's voice bubbled through the water. I had forgotten we were connected. When I jumped from the bath, the handcuffs pulled him with me. He fell over the edge and landed face first across my back. Ow! He lifted his head. Two things became immediately clear. First, he was warm. The heat from his body felt wonderful against my frozen skin. Second, I finally recognized him. Thick, dark curls, a pointed nose, the same offended expression I remembered from hundreds of leaked photographs. Hawthorne, the disgraced American prince. He was no longer the 12-year-old child Mima and I had mocked before the race. He looked about 17 now. He stared down at me as though he had discovered something disgusting stuck to his shoe. Something about him was different. For one thing, he did not know his own identity. His wrists and arms were covered with bruises and needle marks. Someone had injected him repeatedly. I grabbed his face and pulled him closer. His eyes widened. Hey, he tried to pull away. Prince Hawthorne was warm. Heat came from his skin in soft waves. His breath touched my face, and I became painfully aware of how close we were. His legs were tangled with mine, and the pulse in his throat thundered in my ears. He was human, completely alive. Can you let go of me? He demanded. You're freezing. Give me a second. He struggled again. I tightened my grip. This is harassment, he said. Stop acting like a baby. I examined him while trying to ignore the smell of blood moving beneath his skin. I could sense every artery, every pulse, every movement inside his chest. His skin was pale, with a slight purple color similar to mine. His right eye was dark brown. His left eye was changing. Blue color spread through it like paint in water. A thin fluorescent light moved around his iris, forming a pattern that resembled a frozen web or a parasite. Ice had begun forming across his eyebrows. I touched his cheek. Stop poking me. He pulled away. I stared at him. Hawthorne was still alive, but the same cold decay that had changed me was spreading through him. I moved backwards. He tried to create distance between us, only to be stopped by the handcuffs. His breath came out white. I began. He pulled the chain sharply and dragged me closer. Look, he snapped. I don't know where I am. I don't know how I got here, and I don't even know who I am. His lips came dangerously close to mine. I should have moved away. I did not. He was warm. His skin, blood, and breath were warm. Everything about him felt alive. Do you know who I am? He whispered. For the first time, his expression softened. Fear appeared beneath his anger. He raised our connected wrists. You know something? I did not answer. His heartbeat was too loud. If you didn't recognize me, you would have pushed me away by now. He moved over me, sitting across my legs and pinning my arms. The metallic smell from his body filled my throat. Something hungry stirred inside me. Did you do this? He demanded. Did you kidnap me and chain us together because of some sick fantasy? A mechanical voice suddenly spoke from hidden speakers. This is Big Brother. Hawthorne jumped away. His eyes widened. What the hell? I agreed with him. What the hell? House guests are reminded not to participate in intimate behavior, the voice continued. Will Isabel please report to the diary room for the daily briefing? The downstairs bathroom is now open. Isabel, Hawthorne whispered. He looked at me. That's you? He raised his voice towards the cameras. If she's Isabel, who am I? No one answered. The bathroom door slid open. I climbed to my feet, dragging Hawthorne with me. He folded his arms and remained stubbornly in place. I pulled harder. Both of us stumbled through the doorway and entered a long, brightly colored corridor. The first thing I noticed was the blood. A swimming pool stood beside the hallway. The water was dark red, and a single beach ball floated across the surface. The place looked like the abandoned set of a reality television program. The living room and kitchen were strangely clean. Bright beanbags and chairs had been arranged into flower shapes. Colorful decorations covered the walls. Cameras filled every corner. They moved from side to side, following us. Hawthorne repeatedly tried to pull away. Each time, the handcuffs dragged him back towards me. He seemed to forget we were connected every few seconds. Then I smelled something. Blood. The scent was thick, warm, and powerful. My body began moving before I made a decision. I ran. Hawthorne nearly fell as I dragged him behind me. "Where are you going?" he demanded while we climbed a bright green staircase. "They told you to go to the dining room." "Diary room," I corrected. My body moved with surprising speed. My feet jumped over each step. "Didn't you ever watch Big Brother?" "I wouldn't know." He pulled me backwards. "You still haven't told me who I am." I turned to argue. Then I saw blood running down the stairs. One step higher, the entire staircase was covered. Bodies filled the corridor above us. Heads, arms, and pieces of flesh were scattered outside the bedroom doors. Internal organs glistened beneath the lights. Hawthorne stopped. His breath caught. He dropped to his knees and began retching, though little came from his stomach. I continued forwards, dragging him across the floor. The smell made my body feel light. I almost felt as though I were floating. At the end of the corridor, I opened a large bedroom. Rows of beds filled the room. I recognized it as the main sleeping area for the reality show contestants. Hawthorne tried to stop me. I was already moving towards a bed covered in red velvet. Then I realized the sheets were not red. They were white. Blood had soaked through them. Two figures sat back to back on the mattress. Their wrists had been tied together. A dark-haired boy twisted against the restraints. Much of his throat had been torn away, revealing bone beneath the ruined flesh. The girl beside him pulled violently at the ropes. Her eyes were empty. Her curls were covered in blood. She was older than the person I remembered. Taller, beautiful. It felt unfair that she had grown up without me. But I knew her. Mima, her heart-shaped face was still covered in freckles. Her skin was far too pale. Pieces of flesh clung to her mouth, and her teeth had grown longer, curving backwards as she hissed. There was no warmth inside her. No breath. No heartbeat. My best friend was a corpse. Mima's face was the only one my damaged mind had managed to save. Isabel, the mechanical voice cut through my grief. Dead people should not have been able to feel pain like that. I suddenly realized I was kneeling beside the bed with both arms around Mima. Because of the handcuffs, Hawthorne had been pulled against my back. He was shouting and trying to escape. "Isabel, you have been summoned for the daily briefing. Please report to the diary room." I stood. I nodded without knowing why. Then I walked out of the bedroom. Hawthorne stumbled behind me. "How are we supposed to do this?" he whispered. He moved close enough that his face almost touched my shoulder, apparently hoping the cameras could not read his lips. His warmth felt too good. I stamped on his foot before I could enjoy it. He immediately stamped on mine much harder. I dragged him down the stairs. When we reached the main corridor, he raised our connected wrists. Are we supposed to go inside together? I'm not using a bathroom while you're attached to me. It isn't that kind of diary room. I pushed open a large door. After a brief and violent struggle, I pulled Hawthorne inside. The room looked almost exactly like the one from the original reality show. A single cushioned chair faced a wall of screens. Each screen displayed a different room in the house. Mima and the unknown boy remained tied together in the bedroom. A group of living people were hiding inside what looked like a storage room. Another screen showed Hawthorne looking directly into the camera. I was not visible. "Whoa," he muttered. He stared at the screens. "So this is a television show?" Then he looked at me and pointed towards the footage. "Wait, where are you?" Only Hawthorne appeared on the screen. He waved. The version of him on the screen copied the movement. They're doing this on purpose, right? "Hello, Isabel." The voice inside the diary room was male and less mechanical than the earlier announcement. "For the privacy of this conversation, we will temporarily reduce the consciousness of your fellow houseguest. Is that acceptable? If you need to speak to me, you can speak in front of him." I lifted our cuffed wrists, nearly pulling Hawthorne's shoulder from its socket. "Go ahead." The voice remained silent for several seconds. "That is not possible," it finally said. "Isabel, you personally requested that your memories be erased." Hawthorne stared at me. If anger could have killed me again, I would have died immediately. "What?" He pulled our wrists so hard that pain moved through my arm. His heart began racing. "You're part of this?" Before I could respond, his head fell forwards. His body went completely limp. He collapsed against me. I poked his cheek. Nothing happened. He was unconscious. "It is temporary," the voice said. Hawthorne's head rested against my shoulder. His warmth spread into my skin. "Isabel, how much do you currently understand about the outside world?" "Nothing." The answer left my mouth before I could stop it. A camera lowered from the ceiling. Its red light flashed. "Would you like to know what happened outside, kid?" Something about the voice hurt me. Perhaps it was the familiarity hidden beneath the false, emotionless tone. The feeling was almost like drowning. My chest ached. My stomach tightened. Lungs that no longer needed oxygen felt as though they were starving. The sensation burned through my veins. My knees struck the floor. That voice reminded me of someone. A memory appeared for only a second. I reached for it before it disappeared. I was 13 again. I was standing at the first serious race of my life. I won. I defeated 2 professional-level athletes and received the scholarship to Brookside. Like every selfish athlete, I concentrated on my own victory and ignored the world collapsing around me. Europe entered lockdown while I was visiting Brookside for a tour. Jesse drove me there. After the first snowfall, Jesse had become less like a silent machine and more like an older brother. The radio in his car was always tuned to the news. He became obsessed with getting sick. He ordered me to clean my hands with sanitizer every hour and avoided anyone who coughed. I could not blame him. International flights were still operating, which meant the ice virus would eventually reach us. Reports were already describing dead people returning to the streets. They were not zombies. These people were not ordinary reanimated bodies. They were cold. Their blood had frozen. Ice covered their skin. Yet they continued moving through cities across Europe, attacking anything warm. They begged their victims for something they could not name. Every news report repeated the same warning. This virus does not simply kill people, it changes them into monsters. One reporter sounded close to panic. I know what everyone is thinking, and I'm going to say it. Please don't, Jesse muttered from behind his mask. He switched off the radio. Snow struck the windscreen. The wipers struggled against the growing blizzard. I remained silent. Jesse nudged my arm. It will be okay, he said. They claim the virus survives only in cold climates. We should be safe. I looked through the window at the snowstorm. Jesse shrugged. I'm trying to make it sound better for you, kid. He switched the radio on again. The first confirmed case of immersive 12 has been identified in Sydney, Australia. Jesse quickly changed the station. Do you have a music playlist you want to connect? When we reached Brookside, the tour was canceled early. The head teacher had entered quarantine. While I packed to leave, the first case of immersive 12 was confirmed in the United States. 2 days later, there were 100 cases, then 500, then 1,000. 2 weeks after that, during my first professional level race, the United States entered a full lockdown. Mass burials began. Brookside was turned into an emergency hospital. Mom called me. She said she was sick. She could not stop feeling cold. It's probably just the flu, she told me. She died 3 days later. According to Dad, she woke again and tried to tear out his throat. Mom had become cold. Not ordinary winter cold, the vicious kind that searched endlessly for warmth. When Dad stopped replying to my messages, I understood that Mom had found what she wanted. The virus killed and transformed adults. Children were either immune or showed no symptoms. The students at Brookside remained trapped inside the dormitories. Eventually, boredom became stronger than fear. Jesse planned to drive several of us into the city. We escaped through a side entrance, climbed into his truck, and used the smaller roads to avoid police checkpoints. We stopped for petrol. Jesse disappeared. I went inside the station to find him. A cold hand covered my mouth from behind. I woke inside a van. Jesse was there too, wearing handcuffs. During the drive, I heard the adults speaking. Children were being collected everywhere. They were loaded onto school buses and transported to special facilities. Once half the adults in the United States were dead, children became valuable. We were told our blood might contain a cure. The facilities were presented as safe places designed to protect and nurture the future. I was 13 when they performed the first extraction. They strapped me to a metal bed. My wrists and ankles were tied down. I watched my blood move through a clear tube. A nurse smiled down at me. Only a few more pints. I believed her when she said they were helping the world. 5 years passed. The world I remembered disappeared. My transformation had already begun. The virus did not infect or kill children immediately. The creatures controlling the frozen world kept us alive as blood banks. When we reached a certain age, our bodies began changing. At first, we called the disease MERV. Then we called it Emir. Later, everyone simply called it cold. Eventually, we stopped pretending it was an ordinary virus. We called the infected what they truly were. Vampires, the facilities became known as waiting rooms. Children entered at 12 or 13. They left around 20 as blood drinkers. We were connected to 2 intravenous lines every day. One removed our blood, the other filled our bodies with poison. The first thing I lost was my breath. One morning, I woke and realized I no longer needed oxygen. Then the rest of my body began shutting down. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. My sweat turned into crystals against my skin. My reflection became little more than a dark shadow. Technically, I was clinically dead, but a complete transformation required a human sacrifice. A conversion building stood beside the dormitories. It was a slaughterhouse. The screams traveled through the walls. I tried not to imagine how the victims were killed. Roll call took place at 9 at night. Night had become day. Day had become night. I stood in snow that reached my knees, wearing a thin camp uniform over my skeletal body. The children inside the waiting rooms were divided into groups. Yellows were between 12 and 18. Reds were between 18 and 20. Snow fell around us. It had been snowing continuously for 5 years. Mima had disappeared. I assumed she was dead. The only person I still had was quickly running out of time. Blood loss made the world spin around me. Even though my body was becoming something else, I still needed blood. I forced myself to focus on the woman standing before us. She called herself our godmother. Mrs. Moriarty was the most obvious vampire I had ever seen. World leaders at least attempted to hide what they had become. Moriarty enjoyed every stereotype. She was unnaturally beautiful and always dressed in black. That night, she wore knee-high boots and a long dress that fitted tightly around her body. Her straight black hair was hidden partly beneath a dark hat. She looked like a gothic version of Effie Trinket. Children. She called, giving us a bright red smile. Children. Someone behind me repeated in a mocking voice. Jesse. Jesse Cromer, former silver medalist, wore a red uniform. I refused to accept what that color meant. I refused to believe I was losing him. His face had changed over the years. He no longer looked like the beautiful, distant teenage athlete I had once admired. His cheeks were hollow. His teeth had become sharper. His eyes no longer looked completely human. 20-year-olds were almost fully transformed. Jesse still recognized me. At least I believed he did. Sometimes he stared through me as though I were not there. I could never tell whether he had been brainwashed or was only pretending. "It is a beautiful morning, Mrs. Moriarty announced. Her voice was filled with triumph. The final groups of humans have been captured. The royal family has fallen, and the heir is now in our possession. This is truly a glorious day." She began clapping. The children around me joined her. We were the last humans left. No one remained to fight for us. Moriarty looked delighted. "Come along, children. Clap, we had no choice." Applause spread through the crowd. I copied her smile. When she stopped, everyone stopped. One boy continued clapping for a second too long. Guards dragged him away. "I know you are all desperate to hear the latest news," Moriarty said. "The waiting room program has been an extraordinary success. We have converted more than 6 million children." We applauded again. "Give me a break," Jesse muttered behind me. His voice pulled a small smile from my lips. I turned just enough to meet his eyes. Jesse remained impossible to understand. His body had almost completely changed. His behavior sometimes suggested he had been controlled, but part of him was still Jesse. However, Moriarty continued, lowering her voice. "We have encountered a small problem." The crowd became silent. "The newborns are slightly feral." She laughed. We laughed with her because we knew we were expected to. Then she stopped. Her dark eyes searched the crowd. "You," she pointed at Jesse. His careless expression disappeared. The red with the clever smile. "Come here." Her beautiful appearance broke for a moment. Her lips pulled back, revealing long teeth. "You have not completely transformed," she said. "I would like to test something." Jesse hesitated. We had been ordered to face forwards. I could not stop myself from watching him. I was not supposed to feel fear anymore. So why could I hear my own heart beating? Why did it become faster as Jesse walked towards the front? I wanted to protest. Doing so would have meant death. Jesse held his head high. He forced his expression to become empty as he joined Mrs. Moriarty. She placed both hands on his shoulders and turned him towards the crowd. Jesse remained still. His frightened eyes found mine. I missed the selfish person he had once been. The human Jesse would have happily sacrificed another student to save himself. Moriarty dragged her sharp teeth across his neck. It was not fair. They had taken my breath. They had taken my hunger, sleep, and almost every emotion that made me human. They had left only the weakest part, my love for him. Moriarty forced Jesse onto his knees. "What is your name, darling?" "Jesse, ma'am," he said clearly. "Jesse," she crouched in front of him. Her fingernails gripped his chin and pulled his face upwards. Her smile remained wide. Jesse's mouth tightened with disgust. He hated her. Somehow he managed to hide most of it. "Well, Jesse," she said. She pulled a long blade from her clothing. Then she drove it through his skull. A scream tore from my throat. It sounded wild and animal-like. Guards seized my arms. Moriarty did not look away from Jesse. She twisted the blade. The sound of his skull breaking forced me onto my knees. His body collapsed into the snow. Blood ran from one eye. Moriarty looked directly at me as she kicked him aside. "Would you like to tell everyone what you find so amusing?" The memory shattered. I returned to the diary room. Hawthorne remained unconscious against my shoulder. His body gave me a small amount of warmth. Unfortunately, he was also drooling on me. I reminded myself that I did not need to breathe. The main speaker activated again. This time, the voice was less friendly. A cruel, mocking tone appeared beneath the artificial sound. The camera moved closer until I was staring directly into its lens. "So, kid," the voice said, "do you remember now? The original cliffhanger, dark humor, dystopian setting, and major reveals have been preserved.